My name is Tony Penning. I'm the director of the Annenberg Presidential Learning Center here at the Reagan Library. As you are probably aware, today, September 17th, marks the 226th anniversary of the Constitution of the United States, one of my very favorite documents. And I'm so excited and honored that you chose to spend a Tuesday evening here, not with me, nobody came for me because I have nothing of interest to say to you, but I'm so glad that you came out to speak with, or to listen to and engage with the person who probably knows as much, if not more, about the Constitutional Convention than anybody who wasn't there. And I would venture to wager that given his knowledge of history and all the things that we know as a result after the fact, he probably knows more than most of the people who were actually in attendance that day. So I'm very excited to introduce you to, in just a few minutes, our honored guest today, Professor Gordon Lloyd. But before I do, I wanted to share a little bit of President Reagan's thoughts on the Constitution. As you probably know, President Reagan was the president during the bicentennial celebration in 1987, had a great deal of reverence for the Constitution, and so I thought I'd share just a little bit of what he said back in 1987. 200 years ago, the very notion of free self-government was a new idea, but James Madison, a man who many call the father of the Constitution, urged his fellow citizens not to oppose the idea simply because it was new. He argued that it was the glory of the American people that they were not blindly bound to the past, but were willing to rely on their own good sense and experience in charting the future. It's interesting that Madison and others had to defend the Constitution because it was new. Times have changed. For over 200 years, we've lived with freedom under the law, and perhaps we've become complacent about it. We should never forget how rare and how precious freedom is. So, our speaker today is going to talk a little bit about that original, the birth of the Constitution, as it were. He's going to present us with 10 different ways to love your framers. I'm guessing that by virtue of you showing up here on a Tuesday night of your own volition, with no bribe other than cookies and lemonade, that you have kind of at least one love for your framers. He's going to present you with several other options and reasons for why to do that. Just a brief bio on Professor Lloyd, and then a shameless plug. Not for him, but for, well, I guess me on behalf of him. He earned his BA in Economics and Political Science at McGill University and completed all the coursework toward a doctorate in economics at the University of Chicago before receiving his MA and PhD degrees in government at Claremont Graduate School. He's the co-author of 3 books on the American founding and the sole author of a book on the political economy of the New Deal. He also has numerous articles, reviews, and opinion editorials to his credit. He is the creator, with the help of the Ashbrook Center, of 4 highly regarded websites, which you'll see a little bit of tonight, on the Constitution. He has received many teaching, scholarly, and leadership awards, including admission to Phi Beta Kappa and the Howard White Award for Teaching Excellence at Pepperdine University. And this is my personal favorite credential of his. He currently serves on the National Advisory Council for the Walter and Leonore Annenberg Presidential Learning Center here at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. And if you're looking for the perfect gift for October and then on into Christmas, on October 1st, he has a new book co-authored with David Davenport, former president of Pepperdine, called The New Deal and Modern American Conservatism. So you can get that on Amazon, as well as, I guess, you guys know how to use Google. You can find it if you like. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Gordon Lloyd.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. He's had some practice. Looks good. Thank you. Thank you for coming out tonight. And what I intend to do is to show you, as he says, 10 different ways to love your framers. It's a takeoff on Paul Simon's 51 different ways to leave your lovers. And just in case you didn't realize the connection, I've never figured out why you need 51. 1 is good enough for me. But I think you need more than 1 to love your framers, because they come under such attack. And my response these days is, when are you going to stop blaming your parents? When are you going to stop blaming your fathers and take responsibility for what you do? Framers lay foundations. They do not also wash your dishes or clean up after you, because you can make mistakes also. But I want to go through this website. And if you were to type in, now this is taking trust on my part that Wikipedia hasn't paid somebody within the last 10 minutes. If you type in the American founding, you will see, great, teaching American history, #1. And 2 of my current students are here, and 1 of my former students from several years ago at University of Redlands is here. And you'll notice how delighted they are to see that it beats Wikipedia. That has a considerable amount of impact on students. So the American founding, where you can go, there are really 4 different sites in one on this page. If you scroll down, you can see the Constitutional Convention. That's what we're going to focus on tonight, the September the 17th signing of the Constitution. Then there's the famous Federalist, Anti-Federalist debates which took place, and we could take a look at that, but not tonight. The ratification of the Constitution, the first time that up and down the country, people were elected to debate this issue, 9 months, 10 months, and not a drop of blood was spilled. That's a huge American contribution. Try that today. The ratification of the Constitution, we could do that, but not tonight. And then the Bill of Rights. That's the last of the 4 items that I've been putting together. Currently, the colonial era and revolutionary era are tucked in under the Bill of Rights. The Ashbrook Center has asked me to try to make 5 rather than 4. We'll just see how much energy I have in the next couple of years. But what I intend to do tonight I'll give you a hint at each of these to show you how you can continue the story. But what I want to do tonight is to focus on the Constitutional Convention. And if we go to the Constitutional Convention, in turn, if we scroll down, we will notice that the convention I've divided the convention into several parts. Part of the problem with trying to figure out the convention is that there's so many words. It took place over 88 days. There were 55 delegates, and you can get lost. You can get lost in terms of trying to follow through all the events. And one way to try to encourage the citizens and scholars and students to stick with it is to divide the material into 2 fundamental ways to love your framers. One is a visual way, and then the other one is a textual way. And sometimes the visual works better for 9th, 10th, 11th graders, and certainly I have found that the textual gets more attraction from younger scholars in doing PhDs. But my objective is not to suggest that there is one way to love your framers. There are multiple ways. And there are 2 basic ways. One is visual, and the other one is textual. The textual, if we were to go here, you can see that there are 3, and that'll be sort of 3 textual ways to love your framers. One is the Constitutional Convention as a 4-act drama. If we take a look at that just for a moment, you can see that what I've done is to divide it into 4 acts. Just like you could divide Shakespeare's Richard II into a number of acts and scenes, or Plato's Republic. I've divided, quote, Madison's Republic into a number of acts and scenes. All the better, my dear, for you to see an argument unfolding and you can stay with it. This is not what Madison says. This is an editorial decision by me to help you talk to the framers and the framers talk to you. And then I get out of the way. So there's Act 1, the alternative plans. Act 2, the Connecticut Compromise. There is an intermission. Lloyd, you're going too far. I want to understand how you want to do this dramatic. But there was, in fact, an intermission right near the end of July. A committee was created called the Committee on Detail. They went off for about 10 days, and they came back with the first draft of the Constitution, which is the Committee of Detail report. So there was an intermission. The first act and the second act emphasizes debate without emphasizing decision-making. Act 3 and 4 emphasizes decision-making without getting rid of debate. So that for Act 1 and Act 2 are done largely in the committee of the whole, where people can talk without and change their minds without having to say, well, I'm sorry, you can't change your mind, you voted this way. And then this is where the action really gets interesting, because this is the work of committees. The Committee on Detail Report, the Brearley Committee report, which settles the presidency, the Committee on Style report, which becomes virtually the final document, the Constitution itself. And so, whereas Act 1 and Act 2 emphasize the whole work of the convention, talking, Acts 3 and 4 emphasizes, let's take what we have talked about and turn it into a document. So there's a privileged position for the committees and the people who've been on those committees. We're not going to do that tonight, having just led you down that path. That's what I intend to do on Friday. On Friday, I'm going to do the 4-act drama. But that's certainly a way to love your framers. If we go back to the main page from in this section of the convention, you can have a day-by-day summary of the convention. We don't need to go into that, but what it does is instead of looking upon it as a 4-act drama, what I do is what's happening on this day. That despite the conversations which they're having, and they can go high-flying into various notions of justice, etc., there's always a proposal on the table. And if you focus on that proposal that's on the table, hopefully you won't get lost or bored or wonder, what the heck are they talking about? And as usual in America, it usually has something to do with money or taxation. And that leads to all kinds of very interesting interpretations. So that's a second way. Both ways, Constitution and day by day, are textual ways of helping you stay with it, and then helping the framers stay with you. The third is the overall objective of all the 10 ways is to get to Madison's notes. I mean, this is one of the greatest contributions that has been made. It is, for me, it's on the level of Shakespeare, it's on the level of Plato. And one of my objectives, which I've been working on, and should be completed soon, is to come up with the definitive, authentic version of Madison's coverage of the convention. That should be done within this year. But that's where, I mean, if you just click that on for a moment, the ultimate objective of these 10 ways is to get you to the original documents itself. So that if, for example, you want to see what happened on September the 17th, you click on September the 17th, and if you scroll down, see, there's Madison's coverage of the September the 17th. So that ultimately, all these little ways that I'm trying to show you, there's an end to this. There's a purpose to this. This is not just relativism, pick what you want, man. This is the point is, I don't know how you turn around what it is that I might say several years ago that might have encouraged you, or 2 weeks ago. I don't know. But one of these ways is going to work. I know it. I've chatted with Madison, he told me so. Right. Or if you go back now to the main page. You see, those are 3. I could go on. But if I do that, I will never get to in depth into the visual. So what I want to do is, if we have time left over, I can fill in the gaps. But the main visual way I want to do today, which is numbers 4 and 5, is if we scroll down, Anthony, yeah, and we go to the signing of the Constitution. And we look at the interactive scene at the signing of the Constitution. If we scroll down, right, there's Christie's painting. We will see it is one of several paintings that happen to be done, but it is probably one of the most popular. Not one of the most popular to be visited by teachers and by students, because it hangs in the Capitol and no one wants to go to Congress anymore and see that. They just keep away from this place. But it's certainly visible when you look at books and coffee mugs and things like that. And what I think is fascinating about this is that well, that's one thing that's fascinating. There are 40 people in that diagram, in that painting. 39 delegates who signed. And then this chap here, who's William Jackson, who actually took the basic notes, minutes of the convention. I think that Madison's notes are improperly stated. He never called them notes. They weren't called notes until after World War II. It's his coverage of the debates. Notes implies minutes and jottings. There's much more than minutes and jottings. But this is the guy who took the minutes and jottings. So there are 40 people in that painting. 39 signed. And it's very difficult to interpret an interpretation. But one of the things that I have done with this is that you don't have to know one framer from another framer. Or, for example, everyone knows who George Washington is. He's the tallest of all. But just to show, there's George Washington. You click on Washington, and you get a close-up, learn more about Washington, and you learn more about Washington. If you click on Learn More, then you get everything that he did at the Constitutional Convention. And you can do that for the 39 people. In other words, your students and your neighbors, etc., don't have to know who these 39, they don't have to recognize the 39. That is, this interactive shows you who the 39 are, and then you can go from there. So that if we go back, for example, this tells you the whole story of the National Archives understanding, biography, rediscovering George Washington on PBS, etc. So if we go back to the painting, you will notice that Washington is always at the top. And when we look at other paintings, Washington is always there, which raises a very important question. What kind of license is Christie taking with the actual events that took place? To what extent did George Washington actually have that kind of huge, outstanding impact at the convention? Well, that's a fascinating question, and you can follow it with the help of Madison. And you'll notice that there are quite a few times, particularly in August, when the Virginia Convention was totally hopelessly divided, that Washington had to intervene in order to cast a deciding vote for the Virginia delegation. Everybody recognizes Franklin. And you can do the same thing, hit on, click on, and then the biography comes up. And people recognize, for the most part, Alexander Hamilton. And then, for the lesser part, but mainly among scholars and idiots like me, James Madison, little Jimmy. 5'10", always dressed in black, was going to die any moment, he said, and outlived everybody. But one of the points that I want to make here is that in addition to Washington standing above and beyond, Christie has taken these 3 delegates out of their delegations and made them superdelegates. And that raises a question when you now go to the next level of text and on the way to Madison's notes. Check it out, students. Check it out, neighbors. To what extent is this an act? So this is an interpretation. Yes. Thank goodness. Now we know something. We're dealing with interpretations. We're dealing with artistic and textual interpretations of the founding, some of which are not very friendly at all. Some of which are more friendly. I happen to be friendly. But a concerned parent called me about 2-3 years ago and said, I want to let you know that your Christie painting and other things are being shown in the high schools. And I said, great. He said, but my daughter came home and the teacher had asked them, what is wrong with this painting? And I said, well, what was the point? The answer was, there are no women, there are no blacks. As far as we know, there are no transgender. There's no bisexual. And as a consequence, why are we studying them? Because they are a total irrelevance to who we are. And I said, well, we're asking the wrong question. The question is, founders lay foundations. They do not complete. If you ask the founders through that lens transgender, et cetera, you're not going to learn very much. That is, you're going to dismiss them, in effect. Why don't you ask a different question? Why don't we read history forwards and how much of what happens after is consistent with the framers' design? And, for example, in 1787, you couldn't get 40 people, white males in the room. You've got to start someplace. This would never have happened in the history of the world. So the question is, where do you start? Framers lay foundations, they put up buildings. They do not put in carpets. They do not do rehab. They do not build on. That's what the next generation does. This is an experiment in self-government, as Reagan would say, self-government. Well, who are we? We are the South. Get involved. Civic education, civic engagement. There's no reason why those things can't happen. So my point is, why don't you read history forwards and see what happened. 88 days they debated. Never before. All other foundings prior to this had been by like Solon or Moses or Caesar or Theseus. Never before have you got a collection of people. But they were all rich white men. When in the history of the world have you managed to get 45 or 55 rich white men together? The answer is not all of them were rich, by the way. And so what, because of their wealth, we could know what they're going to say? Yeah, sure. Oh, I see. Who is the poorest member on the Supreme Court? Answer is Clarence Thomas. You wouldn't expect then him to be the most conservative. Who is the wealthiest on the court? Ginsburg. So wealth in and of itself does not explain political positions. Look at the Kennedys. Look at the Rockefellers. It's just not so. We're not Europe. Is the answer I'm giving to you. In other words, you can't love something that's painted as ugly or irrelevant. I am here to try to restore some dignity, warts and all, to what it means to found. Founding is difficult stuff, particularly founding from people who are coming from various backgrounds to get on with it. But, to get on with it, Christie has taken these people out of the delegations and presented them as superdelegates. That's a real test. Hamilton was there for less than 44 days. His influence occurred in his writing of the Federalist Papers and being the Treasury Secretary with the First Bank. That is, Christie has put in something that happened after into this event. That's fine, as long as we understand what is going on. Franklin hardly did anything after 1789. He did a heck of a lot before 1787 and 1789. And all the books on the floor shows the scholarly. Jefferson wasn't there. But Christie, because he's so clever, has taken all these books from the Jefferson Library and put them down there. So Jefferson's sort of brain is present in the room. There are all kinds of other things. We haven't hardly started. You scratched the surface of this Christie painting. Windows. Curtains, open. That fact alone is at the center of progressive historiography, the kind of historiography I've just explained, which sees the founding as ill-founded, done deliberately to shaft us. And why? Because behind closed windows, behind closed curtains, all the better to shaft you, my dear, so no one can see. And there's a huge debate then and a huge debate now over what does privacy do to a conversation? And the answer is it encourages conversation. It encourages you not to play to the crowd. There will be a time and a place for opening up everything for conversation. This is not the time. But September the 17th is the time. They open up and the light comes in. Why couldn't we have the light coming in earlier? Politics loves darkness. You have to get things done. If you're going to go right in front of the cameras straight away, you know what would happen? They'd play to the cameras, or they'd pay to the newspapers. They wouldn't get anything done. We go into executive session, NFL and labor, National Hockey League and labor. They go into private sessions. There's nothing intrinsically conspiratorial about going into private sessions, as long as there's a time when you don't go into private sessions anymore and you explain yourself. That's what ratification is about. These two folks here, these three folks here are together. They're from the South Carolina delegation. And it's almost like, hail Washington. Actually, we used to meet people like that before Adolf Hitler spoiled the whole thing. But we used to say, hello, hello, how are you doing? Also, you see this person behind here. If we were to focus on him, Tony, this guy behind there, now one little more, yep, Pierce Butler from South Carolina. If we click, so all of those people are from South Carolina. If we click on him, there we can see him, he's got his face covered up. And the reason for that is that there is no public portrait of Pierce Butler. And that fact really got me thinking about the quality of what Christie is up to. If he's paying that attention to that kind of detail, we need to take him more seriously and see what is he trying to portray. If we learn more, there is an unofficial portrait, and it looks like tee-hee there. And if I look like that, I'd want a hand in front of my face. So if we go back, so there's a certain authenticity to what Christie has done. And we've, again, hardly touched this. But if we were to say about this painting, we click on about this painting at the top, okay, and we could scroll down. Scroll down. The Christie painting, you see, the Christie painting is the revised draft of this lithograph, where you have We the People and Miss Liberty. And then over here, you have We the People and Miss Liberty with little cherubs. And there's Franklin, there's Hamilton, and this is the We the People. So Christie's We the People painting is his draft of the Christie painting, famous Christie painting. What I like about this, this draft, is it's almost like it's the replacement of, in the Vatican, where you've got the Christ and the cross and the clouds. What was the guy's name again? Michelangelo? No, not Angelo. Raphael. That's it. Yes, exactly. Raphael. And he did the Plato up and Aristotle forward, and then the Christian correction, which is the clouds area. So, but instead of the Christian connection, it is Miss Liberty. And if you want to follow that through, it's incredible. Miss Liberty, for the Americans, looks pure, etc. But there's a Miss Liberty for the French Revolution who shows her left breast. And there's a completely different understanding of what Miss Liberty is supposed to be doing. But what part does Miss Liberty play in this? And in fact, when Christie gets around to doing his final draft, Miss Liberty goes into the background, only to make a reappearance when he does the Bill of Rights later on. We'll see that. But if you scroll down a bit, I managed to obtain from the Library of Congress certain paintings. See here, this one here. This is Christie's rendition. He would go up in September, and on September the 17th in the 1930s, he would sit there in the Independence Hall and capture what the lighting was, so that he could capture what it might look like to paint. And if we were to just zero in on this one, Tony, for a minute, I don't know whether it comes up. Okay, does it come up? Yeah, well, there's the We the People. So this is where he did the painting. And if we go back to the right, and if we go here, up in here, this is the same room. Independence Hall in the 19th century was viewed as a sort of a museum and an archive. And so on the wall, these here are the portraits of the framers. They were then moved to the second bank. But this is where they were. This is the famous chandelier. This is the famous statue of Washington that is now in front. And here's the famous chair, which is now in the Assembly Hall. So I think this if we go back to the main page and we go some more, I don't know whether there's, yeah, well, we won't bother with all of those tonight. But this is who he is, etc. So what we have done just so far is one of the 10 ways to love your framers. It is through the Christie painting. It is not the most observed painting, but it tells us a lot from a person who took interpretation seriously. It was done in the 1930s. Why is the 1930s important? Sesquicentennial, the 150th anniversary. Every single regime in the history of the world has collapsed. Every one. When I grew up in the British West Indies, and I was taught that it would the sun would never set on the British Empire. You could always walk somewhere, sometime in the world, right? And being a smart aleck in those days, now very prudent, grown up, I would say the reason why the sun never set in the British Empire is because it never rose in London in the first place. But that was because I was a smart aleck. But it's collapsed. Soviet Empire has collapsed. Every regime, Rome, collapsed. That's one of the facts of life. So to sit down and say, we're going to create a regime which is going to last into remote futurity, 200 years or more, is quite an accomplishment. That's what should be celebrated. That's what should be looked at and remembered. Nation building, constitution writing is not an easy task. And it requires rules and courtesies, etc., to understand conversation. And I think that what Christie has done is to bring out at least part of that in a room discussing, etc. But it is not the most viewed, but that's one. I want to turn now to a second way to love your framers. And I'm going to be quicker on this one. The second way to love your framers is to go back to the signing and into this section and go other artistic interpretations. If you go to other artistic, you can see that I've picked up 1, 2, 3, 4. You can go down. That's about 10 of them. I picked up about 10. Now, interesting, Trumbull did the Declaration of Independence right away. The Declaration was the document that attracted the attention. The very, very first attempt to capture the Constitution was by a guy, if you scroll up a minute, you will see Stearns, Junius Brutus Stearns, 1856. That was the very first time. So you're talking nearly over 75 years after the Constitution is the first rendition. Since then, there have been at least 10. The one that is viewed the most in life, if we scroll down, we will see it is this one, Constitution by Barry Faulkner. Click on that one, right. This is what hangs in the National Archives. And if what I see is true, and when I go there, I see tons of children kicking each other and kicked me, tripped me. No, I didn't. And teachers and adults trying to get them in to see the national treasures. This is the portrait of we don't quite know what it is. It can't be the signing because he does not have 39. It can't be quite a signing because he has people in the picture who didn't sign, who left early. And he doesn't have people in the picture who did sign. Not in the picture, but did sign. Right. So I don't quite know what he's doing. He's clearly not doing September the 17th. Christie is doing September the 17th. But what is fascinating is it's not the number of delegates, which is critical for the Faulkner painting. I think what's important is it's out of doors. And he's picking up on something that was extremely important in American iconography, which is the Liberty Tree. The planting of the Liberty Tree was important. Christie doesn't have a Liberty Tree because we're all inside discussing. Here's the pole and the flags. Christie doesn't have that. But the idea of the pole and the hat, etc., goes way back into the 18th century. And in fact, all the way back to Rome. Rome, it looked like a bunch of Romans, or togas, or something like that. And you've got Alexander Hamilton hitting Gouverneur Morris on the kneecap. I don't know, and this is his peg leg, but he's knocking him on the kneecap with his back turned to us. So it's out of doors. I think this would be the painting that would describe the framers in almost like deistic fashion, the sort of the demigods fashion. Not deliberating so much, although you've got various copies. You've got Madison about to give Washington the copy of the Constitution. But I think it's an interesting alternative, done at exactly the same time. And it's in the National Archives. It was commissioned by the person who was the architect for the National Archives and also the architect for the Jefferson Memorial at the same time. So that you've got the Christie interpretation of deliberation, and you have the Faulkner interpretation of sort of divination of the two. There are others. If we go back to the main alternatives, we go all the way down to the end. The last one, by Glotzman in 1987, that hangs in Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And it was done for the 200th anniversary, which Tony introduced us to with Reagan being the president. By the way, back in the 1930s, it was FDR who was the president. And I've often wanted to do a comparison between FDR's 150th anniversary and Reagan's 200th anniversary, and sort of see how they've incorporated this American story, this American narrative. Because public policy is not just about choosing the most effective for the least cost. It's what story do you tell? And one of the most difficult stories that I have to deal with is the story that America is ill-founded. Which means, as an immigrant, I made a wrong choice. This is the Glotzman painting. What is really very good about this is there's Madison. And that is a proper rendition. Madison sat right next to Washington. By the way, if you look at all of these alternatives, although I don't have the same interactive as I do on the Christie painting, if you just click over Madison there, click on him, it'll show you who it is. So one way that teachers can do is say, all right, we've done the Christie painting, here they are. Now let's go and do a look at the Glotzman painting or the Faulkner painting. Who is that? And then they can actually self-test, or people can actually get to know your framers. You can't love them unless you know them. So unless you start to get to know who they are. So that part of the problem is, oh, there are 39 people, I don't have the faintest idea who they are. Well, you can get to know them. What is good about this painting is the floors. That's exactly how the floors were in those days. The chairs, that's exactly how they were. The tables, that's exactly how they were. And the tables were north to south. And that's how they voted. They voted from New Hampshire in the north all the way down to Georgia in the south. That's how the tables were arranged in that order. Well, those are two different ways to love your framers. What else can we do within the next 10 minutes? And now I'm just going to tell you, go for it. So those are two. What I want to turn to now, and there are lots behind that we can look at, right, is if we look at the interactive map of historic Philadelphia in the late 18th century, what I've done here is put together the map of Philadelphia that a guy called Birch drew, and we've put on red dots at critical points on the map. So, for example, if you want, and you can use the map legend. So if you say, I want to go to Carpenter's Hall. So you scroll down Carpenter's Hall, and it lights up for you, and it should tell you connecting about blank, and it should come up. And I can't filibuster much more. There it is. If we close, you say, well, I want to know where the old State House is, where Independence Hall is. Let's see. Let's just scroll down. Let's see. Well, we know where that is, but no. We don't want to go Gouverneur Morris's accident yet. It's too early to go there. If we scroll down, let's see whether we're going to have the State House. All right, we won't. Let's go here. Oh, missed. Let's go. Debtor's prison, we have to come across. There. What's there? Bishop White's house. No, we go up here. American philosophy. There. All right. See? That's how you make a tour. That's how you do a tour. Right? You could do a tour. There's Independence Hall. Okay. Now, there's all kinds of stories I have that go on behind there. But the two stories I want to, there are three stories I want to tell. One story deals with this spot here. That's Mrs. House's boarding house. Women, particularly widows, received licenses from the city of Philadelphia to run boarding houses. It kept them, shall we say, employed, and they knew how to keep unruly men in line, and they would, and so they ran a lot of these houses. Not much is written about that, but they ran the business infrastructure. Mrs. House's boarding house was a special place where the Virginia delegates would come from 1776 all the way through. Mrs. House's daughter was married to a Virginian, and so James Madison stayed there in that boarding house while he was in Philadelphia during that time. Excuse me. If we click on Mrs. House's boarding house, I have kept a story of this over the last 25 years when I started to get really interested in what was happening. This is the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. If you see there, we'll just focus on this for a moment. Yeah, that is a man's toilet, and on the side here, you will see if we expand it, you will see. I don't know how. No, we can't expand it anymore, but lower down we will. Is a little plaque which says, on this spot James Madison lived during the time of the convention, etc. So what I'm fascinated about this map is, what do we remember and what do we not remember? How do we remember and how do we not remember? Example, my father died 20 years ago. He left at least 300 to 400 jazz tapes that he had taped over the years. And I thought, well, that's special, that's precious. And so my son has asked me, well, why do you keep them? It's just sort of the fond memories of a person who's retired. I said, it's my father's. And he says, but Dad, you can get all of those in high quality just by downloading. Why would you want to do that? And I thought, of course, he's not going to throw away my books, is he? So it's very interesting what it is that we remember, how we remember it, how we want the next generation to remember it, or whether we want it, or whether we care or not. I mean, we cannot tell an American narrative unless something is handed down from one generation to another. It would appear that James Madison's stay at Mrs. House's boarding house is not important to the architects and the historiographers of the late 20th century. If we were to come down some more, this is a blow up of the, there it is, James Madison, delegates, et cetera, and this is what was in the side. 1780 to 1793. Thanks a lot. That makes me feel so much better. And if you were to come down, this is in the 20th century. They took down the toilets, and they built this, so that a slab of concrete now replaces a building. And what is that? That shows me a huge difference is taking place in the memory of what we mean to have a constitutional democracy. Instead of preserving a house where deliberation took place, that's where the delegates, that's where the Virginia plan was hatched. That's where people went and talked at night. That's where Madison wrote down all his notes. Instead, ironically, Madison is the author also of the First Amendment. But the point is, any fool can stand up there and utter anything. And that is now the commemoration of democracy in Philadelphia in the 21st century, rather than a house which is to be preserved, which entails deliberation and choice and reflection. This is what democracy now means. Democracy now means engagement, civic engagement, rather than what I think old-fashioned democracy means. It means civic education. I make a distinction between civic education and civic engagement. The distinction is civic engagement is fine if you know what you're talking about. And be sure, if you know what you're talking about, I'd like you to be engaged. But this notion of two different understandings of democracy is there. And if we scroll down some more, and all the way down to the end, all the way down to the end, this is what we now have in Mr. Madison, Mrs. House's boarding house. It is a Market Street stop for the subway. Now, whenever I give this story, usually there are people who say, what a shame. And I ask, well, we can't preserve everything. Well, yeah, but we should have preserved that. And I say, well, why? Why should we preserve that rather than something else? And the answer is because it has to deal with Madison. Well, Madison is not exactly the most known figure in American historiography. Scholars know him, scholars love him, but there are no bombs. I mean, what do you do? I mean, July the 4th, firecrackers are what you do. I mean, what do you do with Madison? Let's hear it for moderation. What do you want? Moderation. When? Now and again. That is really, that's really appealing. And no wonder we don't have a plaque in his honor. I mean, what is going on? If we were to now look at the other side, which would be, there you go. That's Robert Morris's townhouse. That was the house of houses in Philadelphia. That's where George Washington stayed. And then later on, when the government moved to Philadelphia in the 1790s, that became the president's house. And Congress moved to near Independence Hall, etc. What is it? You can see it. These are Birch's pictures. You come down, you can see that they leveled it. But they found in building this, they leveled the bathroom. That was a women's bathroom. So they leveled that down, and then they discovered slave bones as they were trying to rearrange things. And so what has happened is, if you, I think, yeah, you scroll down a little bit more. Yeah, this is it now. So that. Yeah, you have to scroll up. That's it. That's what it looked like. It's an open-air spot, and it's called the President's House. But mainly, it is a critique of the American founding dealing with slavery. And kids go in, kids go out, and when they leave that, they have been taught that America really is ill-founded, that this is the place where you go to find out about slavery. And the irony of ironies is across the road, you have the Visitor Center, where Thomas Jefferson's draft of the Declaration of Independence, which condemns slavery, is, and across the road you've got Independence Hall, which is no longer somehow the symbol, and right behind it you have the Liberty Bell. So there's a whole. You take a group of people to Philadelphia, you walk around there, you've got two different competing versions of the American narrative right within a block. I mean, it really is fascinating. I said three, but I'm a prof. So it's four. Let's close this up and go back to the map for a minute, please. Okay, I want to look at the Indian Queen Tavern. There we are, Indian Queen Tavern. Right, the Indian Queen Tavern was where, well, Mrs. House owned the Indian Queen Tavern as well. And it's high-class taverns. It was not just drink. I mean, people stayed there, there's conferences and whatnot. And this is the place where the Connecticut Compromise was discussed. A lot of the delegates met. That's a picture of what it looked like in those days. And you look at Birch's painting, you can see it. But today, what is it today? It is Fox Studio. And that's it. You wouldn't know it that's where the Indian tavern was. I do, because I'm interested in that. I'm keeping a record of it. Why? Because I'm mad. I'm just insane. Right? I don't expect other people to do that. But if somebody doesn't keep the record alive, we won't know that that was where the Indian Queen tavern. Why? Because that's something we don't remember. Okay? The last one, for memory purposes, I can't leave this because I know that Tony would be very upset, and I know he's going to go right to it on Dock Street. If you keep going down on Dock Street, yeah, you just passed it. There we go, there. Scene of Gouverneur Morris's accident. Gouverneur Morris was quite the guy. And one night in the 1780s, see, isn't it interesting? The Faulkner painting has his peg leg on the left. This one's on the right. But I know he did have a peg leg. Right? I can't tell you which one it was, but he had a peg leg. And Gouverneur Morris, he was in a carriage with a married woman. And the irate husband followed. And Gouverneur Morris jumped out of the wagon, and the carriage rolled over his leg. And the recommendation was, cut it off. And John Jay wrote to him and says, while you're at it, cut something else off. And Gouverneur Morris says, no, you make it sound so good, I think I'll have the other leg cut off. Right. So anyway, but it didn't seem to stop him. And I have thought that it would be very good to have a commemorative sign showing where he had lost his leg. And it's on this spot right there. There's no sign, but I know it. I know it's right there. It's right next to the tavern where you can go and have a good meal and a good drink. So it's right there. And I've offered to give $100 to put a little plaque there. I haven't received any response. But I think that's a great spot. Look at the cobble streets. Look at they've done everything to remember Philadelphia as it used to be and not remember this incident, the rake who wrote the Constitution. That's the title of a book on Gouverneur Morris. Fine, we could go on, but we won't. We could go on to look at Philadelphia from across the river. If you scroll down from there, I think you have to close it. Yeah, if you click on here, for example, just click on, yeah, it shows you there's Market Street. That's where the freeway starts right now, the end of Market Street. There's Christ Church, number one. It's the tallest building in Philadelphia then. This is Independence Hall right there, etc. Look at the number of churches, the variety of churches. So that the map that I have goes north, south, the river, and west. 40,000 people living in that area, one pub for every 400 people. And that sounds like a lot until you realize that in America today, there's one lawyer for 287 people. And then you have your choices, lubrication or litigation. And I know my choice. So this is Market Street. And there's all kinds of things we could do, but we won't. We will close with, what will we close with? We'll close with 2 or 3 indications of other ways to love your founders. We've done 3 anyway, pretty thoroughly. What I want to take a look at is something that took me a long time, at least 25 years. If you look at the resources of the convention, and you take convention attendance record, click that on, and you go down and you go into the, if you go into it, no, not that, enter the attendance record. That's it. If you enter it, you will see. So that if you want to know, for example, let's just say you pick May the 25th. Just click on May the 25th. It'll tell you who was there at the convention on May the 25th. Wow. And you can track it on a day-by-day basis. The hardest for me was doing Pennsylvania because they wrote no letters home. They didn't get paid, so you can't track them. If we were to look, if you go back, just I think 1 or 2, please. Yeah, alternative plan. Go, go back. I think we have to close it. Yeah, we have to go back one more. All right. Attendance record is also available in Microsoft Excel file. If I don't know whether it'll come up, or we have to wait a long time. Oh, this is how I started it off. You got all the delegates here, and it shows you present, absent through the various days, so that you can actually track a delegate rather than tracking an issue. That took 25 years to do. That's another way to love your framers, but you have to love your framers in order to do that. So which comes first? You love your framers and do it, and love your framers. All right. If we were to go back again, we could close. Yeah, we can close that. Another thing that took me a long time, if we close this, and I'll come back to the goodbyes in a moment. We do, just for example, this one, just before that. Just before that. If we come to ratification, view that, and if you scroll down, yeah. You put an interactive ratification map, view the interactive. Here you don't have to know the states, the students you don't know the states. But if you can see Virginia up in there, Virginia, it shows you blue county, red county, the mixture of who the Federalists were, who the Anti-Federalists were, so that people can visually, graphically understand it before they go into the text of the debates. Two more things. One is a visual, and then I'll wrap it up with the farewell on September the 17th. If we go to Bill of Rights, this is where I want to go to Bill of Rights. Now, the Bill of Rights. And we go down, go down. Right, documentary origins and the politics of the Bill of Rights, interactive chart. If we go there, what I have done is to put, Madison had 39 proposals which he introduced to the first Congress. Of those 39, 26 became the Bill of Rights. Whatever you see a red star, that's what's in the Bill of Rights. Those 26 were contained within 10 amendments. Okay? Where do these rights come from? That's the point to this chart. If you want to think, where did these rights, to what extent did these rights come from the English and colonial documents? Let's just examine that. So you click those two off. You have the English colonial documents. What you do is you scroll down, please. And now what you have is, wait a minute, we want to get rid of that. So we want to click on this. Click here. Right, so that takes care of that. Then we click on this and click on that. Right, so we should only have the English and colonial documents now. You better behave yourself. That's it. All right, so these are the documents: Magna Carta, New York Privileges, English Bill of Rights, Massachusetts Body of Liberties, and here are the 26. So what kind of background, what kind of tradition, where did they come from? So you want to say, well, let's just see, for example, double jeopardy. So if we look at double jeopardy, Massachusetts Body of Liberties. All right, we switch it around. Let's go to the Massachusetts Body of Liberties. It tells you what's in there. If you say, well, so we clean it, whatever the correct term is, Tony. And you say, I want to look at due process of law, right there. So we go to due process of law. Come on, there. Due process of law. Oh, virtually everyone has due process of law. Due process of law goes all the way back, okay? Et cetera, et cetera. Where would they right to bear arms? Yeah, let's see. Right, where would we find it? Charter of Rhode Island, English Bill of Rights, Charter of Connecticut, 1662. The actual language of keep and bear arms comes out of the English Bill of Rights, except it's Protestants who have the right to bear arms. Come across the country and we give everybody the right to bear arms. I want to end tonight, but we still have time for you to ask me some questions. I want to end tonight with what happened on or around September the 17th. I mean, what did the framers do? So we go back now to the Constitutional Convention site. I think I must have done 10 by now. I love your framers. If we go back to Constitutional Convention and we take a look at the resources, and we go to the entertainment of George Washington and click on that. And this is the entertainment of George Washington at the City Tavern, September 1787. I came across this when I was volunteering for the Miracle in Philadelphia 1987 campaign. And I thought, wow, I've really stumbled onto something. This is the framers' farewell dinner, September the 17th. Well, it's just the 14th, it's close. The date is the 15th. Well, it did end on the 15th, which was a Saturday. And so they had to wait till the weekend. But it isn't. It's the entertainment of Washington by his troops. But it, I think, gives an indication of what dinner was like. To 55 gentlemen. Oh, there were 55 framers. You're pushing it. Relishes, olives, etc., 20 pounds, 12 shillings and 6 pence. 54 bottles of Madeira, 20 pounds, 5. 60 bottles of claret, 21 pounds. 8 ditto of old stock, 22 bottles of porter, 8 bottles of cider, 12 bottles of beer, 7 large bowls, spelling was not their strength, cigars, spermaceti, candles, etc., the decanters, wine glasses, and tumblers broken, to 16 servants and musicians, 16 bottles of claret, 5 bottles of Madeira, 7 bowls of punch. The total bill was 89 pounds, 4 shillings and 2 pence. And I asked somebody to work that out for me, and he tells me that the bill would today cost $15,000 for that's the dinner bill. And then part 2 is the bill for musicians. And we know that somebody called George Christoph gets £1, Mr. Schultz, £1, Mr. Trenner, £1, John Kaiser, 15 shillings, William Hongtong, Philip Rotti, David Cockstruck, Jan Brune, Konrad Spackenberg. Where did these Germans come from? Where did they come from? I get a letter from George Christoph the 15th or something, and he says, what do you know about my father? And I think he got paid for drinking and playing. He says, well, let me tell you, all of these folks were part of Hanoverian militia that was hired by George III to come over and fight. And that the peace treaty of 1783 involved the turning back of prisoners. And they didn't want to go. I guess they liked American prison food. And they didn't want to go back. And so in 1787, here they're playing a George Washington's farewell dinner. If that's not an immigrant story, that's something to be proud about. Good evening. Thank you. But when I say good evening, thank you, I don't mean no questions. Tony, how much do we have?
We have time for 15 minutes of questions.
Oh, man, let me tell you, it's a tough to do. Love your framers in that. No, I can do it in an hour and 15 minutes. Yes?
You mentioned that George Washington was like a deal breaker, or making the deal between the two. What was the big issues that they were having that he had to step in?
The role of the Senate, for example. In August, you have a split between Madison and Blair on one side, who are pretty much in favor of the way the Constitution is developing. And then you have Mason and Randolph, who start to oppose the way the Constitution is developing. They're concerned about the role of the states. They're concerned that power in Congress has not been sufficiently specified. They're concerned about the powers of the presidency. And there were 2 other delegates from Virginia, but they left early. McClurg left because he had a medical practice and his wife suggested he come back, and Wythe left early to take care of his dying wife. So that left in August 2 liking the way things were going, to not liking the way things were going, and Mason and Randolph in the end didn't sign because they didn't like the way things were going. And so Washington actually joined on virtually all of those votes. I can't name you sort of this rather than this, but what he did was he kept the Madison forces going, and he didn't want to dirty his hands. So it's not so much how much Washington said. He only said about, recorded to have said one or two things. But he's the deal breaker in terms of, put it this way, officially, Virginia could not have signed on September the 17th had Washington not signed. Because you'd have two saying yes and two saying no, and that would have been no. So Washington was very important. And I think the biggest contribution is where he writes home at the end of June and says, you know, I don't know where we're going with all of this. This seems to be so desperate. And you sit back and you think, well, he only opened his mouth once, right on the last day, and people just sort of fell all over each other trying to say, yeah, whatever you want. Well, why didn't he open his mouth during those doom days of late June? And there are two answers. One is given by Forrest McDonald, who says, in effect, that Washington wasn't up to the task. He was not he was a general, but he was not a statesman in the sense of keeping up with Madison and the boys. And he was there for show, and et cetera. And then I take an opposite view, which is that even Washington realized that there's going to have to be life after Washington. And the only way in which you teach people to govern themselves is that they have to fall flat on their face in order to get themselves up. And if he, Washington, were to intervene just like that and get it done, you'd be back to Cicero, you'd be back to Solon, everything. So that these folks had to learn, and they did, and they figured it out. But that doesn't mean to say Washington didn't get very upset about it. So what he did was not so much you got knockheads like Lyndon Johnson. He just kept it moving along, despairing as he was doing that. Yes?
We have people today who look at the Constitution and see it as an evolving document. And we have people who, on the other side of the fence, say it's written in stone.
Yep.
What's your opinion?
Both are wrong. I think and I'm not going to say on the one hand, on the other. What I'm going to say is the following, that the Constitution is not the Quran. The Constitution is not the Old Testament. The Constitution is a framework. Framers provide a framework within which disputes ought to be settled. So you've got checks and balances in the House and Senate. You have separation of powers between the House, Senate, and the executive. So what that's supposed to do is to create the deliberate sense of the community. So it's not written in stone. There's something that we, the people, must have a say in. That is, our generation must have it. But our generation needs to be civically educated in order to be able to express that. And all the better to try to encourage us to be civilly educated. It's that we've got these institutional checks and balances along the way. Now, some would say that shows how difficult it is, how undemocratic it is. So I've just made the case against written in stone. It has to be written, it has to be framework, and we have to learn how to govern ourselves. Just like our kids have to govern themselves. I'm not particularly interested in passing amendments to the Constitution, because in one sense, passing amendments means that we know better for our kids than they do, because we've just decided for them what's in their own interest. For example, we tell them, sorry, you can't drink. And then 10 years later, they grow up and they overdo what we did, thank goodness. I mean, the one thing that the framers would not recognize if they came back was the 18th Amendment. Limited government means, in effect, that the range of government is limited to certain specific objects, like stopping people from breaking your leg and picking your pocket. It does not mean extending to something called moral character. That's done in the churches. That's done in the family. That's done at home. So to the extent that a living Constitution means we can do whatever we want to do because we have the vote, that violates So I'm saying both the idea that it's written in stone and the idea we can do whatever we want, violate, I think, the spirit of the framers. We have provided a framework. So it's not written in stone. But that framework makes sense because it must be we, the sensible people. We, yeah, I think that's the point. If you idiots go out and choose a monarch, you don't deserve to be free. You've got to be sensible. That's where civic education comes in. What is our job as teachers and as parents? It's to make sure that that our offspring know the country, understand where America is different, what its drawbacks are, how come it has been a success. The problem with it, with the idea of the Constitution in stone, is it treats it like, and again, to go back, it treats it like the Quran. That's not what the Constitution is about. The problem with it being a living Constitution is it turns it over to the intellectuals who have deep disrespect for the American founding. So is there a way, is there a middle ground? Is there a way, and I would say it's the problem we all have in life. Is there a way in which I can adhere to principles and be prudent? Or at the moment I am prudent, lead me down a slippery slope? That's what self-government is. Self-government is not a formula. And so it's not written in stone. And self-government cannot be whatever I want it to be. So let's just take cruel and unusual punishment. Back in those days, cruel and unusual punishment was not understood to include the death penalty. You got the Fifth Amendment written right before the Eighth, which says your life shall not be taken unless the hangman's noose is according to code. Right, or whatever. And so that the Eighth Amendment says no cruel and unusual punishment. So if you were to take it in stone, it means that hanging is fine. If ours is a living constitution, well, you don't want to have people being put to death. That's the opposite of living. Therefore, emerging standards of decency, and therefore we have decided. But who's the we? What is it that gives courts the particular, shall we say, insight as to determine what cruel and unusual punishment is? Madison's answer would be, we don't want cruel and unusual punishment. Does that mean that the understanding changes through time? Yes. But we must do it through the deliberate sense of the community. That is, over a period of time, we've come to accept this. It becomes part of the fabric or the common law understanding of the Constitution. Not because some judge says so, but rather it becomes part of our fabric and who we are. The churches face this. At one time, women had to wear a hat in church. If they didn't wear a hat, somehow we're in trouble. Okay. Vatican II. You don't see the priest looks at you now instead of turning his back. So there are certain cases in which you say, is it a matter of salvation? Does it go to the core, or is that something that we can live with? And is there a formula for that? No. Do you just make it up as you go along? No. Well, what is it? Civic education. And I understand it's a slippery thing, but at the same time, it's what we acquire over time. See, Madison was very, very upset with John Marshall's 1819 decision, McCulloch versus Maryland. Not because he disagreed with the opinion. I mean the outcome. It dealt with the bank. And he, Madison, had vetoed the bank at one time as president. He then decides he's not going to veto. And why? He says, look, who am I? I got the presidential power to veto. But you know what? I vetoed. You guys have gone through the House again with this, the Senate again. You've talked it over in the country. You talked it over all of it. So who am I to stop the deliberate sense of the community from prevailing and making it common law constitutional? And so he said, I'm fine. But Marshall creates some doctrine, says Madison, which no one at the founding, no one for the last 20 years had ever come up with. And therefore, he has entered He has come up with some kind of formula which has entered the debate because he has decided that he's the one who decides, who makes up his mind. So I think constitutional democracy is a very delicate thing, and we have to take responsibility ourselves. We cannot turn it over to experts. And I would say that one of the most dangerous positions, I think, is that we live under a constitution, but the constitution is whatever the court says it is.
Yeah.
That the Constitution, ultimately, is what 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and 3/4 of the state legislatures say it is. Which means, we certainly hope that 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and 3/4 of the state legislatures are properly civically educated.
Wow. And Obamacare falls into what in this?
Well, well, see, now that's a very, very interesting question. Is that if you ask certain con law people who I've spoken with, they're surprised that this is even a constitutional question because McCulloch versus Maryland settled it. And I say, you know, Madison, among the many prophetic things that you have said, you just hit it on the head. That's what McCulloch versus Maryland has done. It has taught lawyers that federal government can use the Interstate Commerce Clause to reach everywhere. And there's nothing which suggests, it seems to me, that the role of a judge is to help the political branches make its decision. We need civic education in the court. We need civic education all over the place. Yes?
What would be the definition of civic education, and what would be the parameters to make sure those people that were sent into Washington have it?
You know, that's difficult. There are no guarantees. When I first started this about 10 years ago, I can tell you there was a pessimistic mood. And the pessimistic mood is the rot is so deep that you're never going to be able to get anybody to change it. And I said, well, what would be a decent measure? And I can tell you what the decent measure is. I am not going to say how old you are.
Good.
I'm not going to say how long ago it was. She's here. I used to teach at the University of Redlands. I could give the dates. 1969 to 1997. She's here. I teach at the Pepperdine University, 1997 to 2013. 2 students are here. You're here. You all have children. You care about your country. We start somewhere. Why is education so important? Because we don't want dumb children. The point is, this has become silly, right? No child left behind, not even dumb ones. Some child is going to get left behind. So therefore, everyone has to get left behind?
Right.
I don't know how you assess it other than the fact that, I didn't invent I didn't invent this. Tony talked to me about civic education. He'd seen the website. He'd come over to Pepperdine, heard me give a Constitutional Day talk to me about it. Well, one step at a time. One step here, one step there, one step there. I get letters from students from years ago. Heck, I didn't realize they changed their life. I know that on Friday when I give the talk, I just heard from said she's bringing her entire department from San Pedro. But I take an extra cup of coffee. No, but I don't know. I can't answer your question. The reason being because I don't know that there's such a thing as a general theory of education. I do know we want to be able to help our students and our offspring to turn themselves around. If you tell them what to do, they probably won't do it. But my hope is if I give you 10 different ways, I'm not being a relativist. I'm trying to say, you know, I don't know you well enough to know what ticks you off and what ticks you on. I don't know. But I would hope that you love your children, you're concerned about the well-being of your country, and you will do whatever small bit that you can do within your limited area. And if we have to wait for something big to happen, it won't happen. But my concern right now is one of the few things that the federal government, I think, has done a pretty good job of is since 2000, is in these Teaching American grants and providing opportunities for teachers to read content, to look at content rather than flip charts. And it's content is the way to go. That if you own the material or you think you own the material, you can then decide for yourself what to do on the spot. I shouldn't be having to write a lesson plan for you. I should be able to introduce you to this, recharge your batteries, and then you remember why you joined this profession. And so I'm looking for touching your soul. That's a long, hard job, and hopefully others will come after me, and others will come after me, and the IRS will come after me, and you know, everything would come after you. I don't know how. I really do not know how you measure. But if you use everyone, if you use the words everyone, guarantee, never happen, I think you're almost setting yourself up for failure. Impossible dream, honey, it's impossible. Grow up, don't be like Thoreau. Anyway, he didn't really suffer. They had tea delivered or something in the other. And forget Emerson. Stop coddling kids. When are they going to stop blaming their parents? When are they going to stop blaming their fathers? We seem to have done a good job of that. So your question is very good. All I can say is take one step at a time and do what you can for what you, just do it. And one answer is I could say, I've played with this. I could say, look, I'm 71. I wish all these kind of influence that I'm being able to have would have happened to me 10 to 15 years ago when I had some energy. But it's happening to me now, on the threshold of old age. What a darn trick. Or you can say, well, thank goodness it's happening now. And who knows, 1 good year, 2 good years. I can remember a shrink telling me that, anything important you do is going to be done by the time you're 60 to 65. So why are you thinking of this 10-year plan, et cetera, et cetera? I said, because if there's one thing the Soviets taught me, it was a 10-year plan. I've got to think longer. You have to. And anyway, today's 70 is yesterday's 25. No. Keep trying. That's the only answer I can give to you. I see somebody rushing.
What's that? Oh, just wanted to just take one last opportunity to say thank you for sharing your energy. I wish we could take just an ounce of the passion and energy and love for the Constitution that you have and give it to each and every student who is in our schools in this country. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us tonight. We really appreciate it.
And may the blessings of liberty be secure for you and your posterity.
Thank you.